It's time for Security Now with Steve Gibson. 1 terabit per second DDoS attacks are on the horizon. It's time for you to say goodbye to Yahoo. iOS 10 is 2,500 times easier to crack, and it's Judgment Day for misbehaving CAs. It's all coming up next on Security Now.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Security Now is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 579, recorded September 27, 2016. DDoSes, breaches, and other records to be broken. This episode of Security Now is brought to you by the Ring Video Doorbell. With Ring, you can see and talk to anyone at your door from anywhere in the world using your smartphone. It's like caller ID for your house. Go to ring.com/securitynow and get up to $150 off a Ring of Security kit with their limited time offer. And by IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV is an easy, entertaining approach to online IT training. For a free 7-day trial and 30% off the lifetime of your account, go to itpro.tv/securitynow and use the code SN30. It's time for Security Now, your respite from the increasingly insecure world in which we live. It's the show where we take a deep look at the hot topics, at the newest exploits, and the most frustrating worst practices in the security world with our explainer-in-chief, Mr. Steve Gibson. Steve, of course, of GRC.com, the man who created Shields Up, Spinrite, and Squirrel, fine security products that we all use. Steve, again, it is a pleasure to work with you, my friend.
Hey, Father Robert, great to be back with you for our second of 3 recordings with you of Security Now. And, you know, it's interesting when you were saying increasingly insecure world, I was thinking, okay, is it increasingly insecure, or are we just more aware of the existing, always have been there insecurities? And I think both are true.
Absolutely,
unfortunately, I think as we keep adding features and new capabilities, the lesson is we're introducing vulnerabilities that didn't exist before. So there's both cleaning up the new messes and catching up with the old messes. So, you know, oftentimes we're like talking about some OpenSSL problem that's been in there for 20 years and no one had found it. So in one sense, we're less secure because now it's been found. On the other hand, then it gets fixed. And so we're more secure than we were, even though we didn't realize before that we were less secure than we thought. So that doesn't confuse you. This podcast will.
You know, Steve, this is actually a very common trend inside of any kind of reporting, not just the tech world, but it's the whole idea that since the news cycles now go 24/7, and not only that, but they go beyond because anybody can be a news source now with social media, you find out about things a lot more quickly, and you find a lot more hyperbole in our standard news sources. And I'm with you. I think a lot of these exploits have existed forever. It's just now they're being brought to light. But there is one thing, and we're going to talk about this later on in the show, that I think goes on the other side, where it is more and more insecure, and that is the Internet of Things. The exploding Internet of Things it's really changed a couple of the equations as far as what we think is secure and what is not. Now, one quick note before we go. I can't believe this. This is your Q&A 240. This is your 240 Q&A, Steve, of 579 episodes. That's amazing.
Yeah, I didn't realize that we started that as early on as we did, but I was beginning to get feedback from people, and I thought, you know, it's really great to hear from our listeners. It engages our audience, and it helps me to better understand, sort of like to steer the podcast and understand the sorts of things that we need and should cover. And this week, we've got a bunch of stuff. We'll, of course, talk about Brian Krebs' problems with the big sustained DDoS that finally forced Akamai to say, Brian, we're sorry, we cannot continue hosting you. That generated a lot of controversy and some interesting social commentary as well. And, of course, he got picked up by by Google's Project Shield that we'll talk about. Much a buzz in the news was Yahoo's. They actually broke a record, and not in a good way. 500 million user record data breach. There are some interesting details about that I haven't seen much covered in the press. Apple did break something crucial in iOS 10's backup. We'll talk about that. Within 24 hours of getting his new iPhone 7, a teenager, hopefully after he finished his homework, jailbroke the phone. Microsoft has formally offers the removal of the Get Windows 10, I don't want to call it malware, annoyware. There is a new OpenSSL server DOS flaw, which essentially allows a remote person to crash a server that's based on OpenSSL. More problems with WoSign and StartCom relative to Mozilla. We covered this a couple of weeks ago. That is looking at Mozilla's very careful march forward, laying the groundwork for basically pulling the plug on their support for WoSign and StartCom's certificates. Bittorrent Sync is one of the most requested for podcasts. That is, for me to talk about it. The problem is they absolutely refuse to provide documentation for the protocol. There's a new paper out, still doesn't give me what I want, but it's probably enough that I can give it a podcast and talk about what we do know, with the caveat that, well, without the details, there could be something hidden, but, their heart seems to be in the right place. We've got a little bit of errata, some miscellaneous stuff, and then being a Q&A, as you say, the 240th one, we'll look at 10 listener prompted comments and questions and discuss those. So I think another great couple hours for our listeners.
That's absolutely amazing, Steve. I mean, just the amount of security-related stories that have broken this past week and a half or so have been fantastic. As you mentioned, everything from Yahoo's very, very unfortunate record to Akamai. And actually, that's a very serious problem, which, as you mentioned in your opening comments, is actually a problem that's been around for a long time. It's just being amplified by the emergence of new technologies. We're going to get to all of that. The die has been cast. The drivers are in their positions. The orchestra is winding up for the overture. But before we dive in, let's go ahead and take a moment to thank the first sponsor of this episode of Security Now. And folks, this is a sponsor that I really believe in. I actually bought one of their products way back when, before they were a sponsor of Twit TV. The reason why I bought it was simple. I love my parents, and I worry about them. You see, they moved to a home that we had bought for vacation in Las Vegas, and the area has sort of become, well, not a retirement community, but definitely a place for the elderly to enjoy some quality golden years. Unfortunately, over the last few years, the crime rate has skyrocketed because people realize that the elderly are going to be up at the club, that they're not going to be home, that they're always going to be out. And so we get a lot of people knocking on doors, waiting to hear no answer, and then realizing they've got hours and hours to burglarize the place. Well, we could have hired more private security. I could have gotten them a guard dog, although the guard dog they have right now is pretty much useless. But instead, I decided to get them a Ring video doorbell. Now, the Ring video doorbell is a very interesting piece of technology. It ties into your existing doorbell system. It can be powered off the house or an internal battery, and then it gives you two-way communication with whoever might come to the door. Imagine this. Someone rings the bell because they want to leave a package. Let's say they're with UPS or FedEx. Now, no matter where you are in the world, on your phone, you get a notification that there's someone who has rung your bell. You can opt to disregard or start a conversation. You can see them, you can talk to them, and they can hear you. You could tell them, hey, could you leave the package under the door? Or could you hold it and come back another day because I can't come to the door right now. But more importantly, if it's someone who's just trying to see if you're home, they'll get an answer from someone who sounds like they're inside the house, and they'll go away. It's all about not being the low-hanging fruit. Now, the Ring video doorbell now is part of the Ring of security because Ring has realized that it's not just your front door, and they're giving you all the tools you need to make sure your entire home is protected. Their kits include a Ring video doorbell and may include a stick-up cam, solar panel, chime, and a solar security sign. The Pro kits include a slim video doorbell Pro with crystal clear 1080p HD video and night vision. And of course, it's hardwired so it never needs to charge. The wireless and weatherproof HD stick-up cam keeps an eye on other parts of your property and allows you to hear and speak to visitors with two-way talk. Now, you plug your Chime into any standard power outlet, and you'll get a notification anytime someone clicks your doorbell. Even if your phone's not on, even if it's not connected, you'll always know if there's someone who's waiting at the front door. Now, I know this is silly, but I love the illuminated solar security sign. It's something that lights up. It's something that lets people know that, yes, there is a system here. Yes, we are watching you. And again, folks, it's not about having foolproof security. It's about making sure that people know that this is not the house to bother. Now, the Ring Video Doorbell and Stick-Up Cam installed in just minutes. In fact, my father was able to install it in 5 minutes flat. And working together with the entire ring of security, it can provide you with 24/7 monitoring of your entire home, whether you're in the living room or thousands of miles away. I trust Ring to protect my loved ones. I hope you will too. Join the millions of homeowners who protect their home with Ring. For a limited time, Security Now listeners can get up to $150 off one of the Ring of Security kits. Go to ring.com/securitynow. That's ring.com/securitynow. And we thank Ring for their support of Security Now. Now, Steve, Brian Krebs had a very interesting week.
Well, Brian has been, of course, we talk about him often. He is a leading researcher whose sort of focus is security breaches in the private sector. And he seems very fascinated by the whole underground hacker world. And he's also very outspoken. So he tends to be a frequent target of denial of service attacks. So finally, he sought greater protection and arranged a deal with Akamai, the well-known content delivery network, in order to essentially have them host his site. They provide caching services. There's the problem with a denial of service attack, which we've covered through the years, is a bandwidth concentration. That is, you typically have widely scattered clients, and they're clients in as much as they are targeting a server, trying to flood that server. And so the traffic bound for that single point of service, as it jumps from router to router heading in toward that server, the traffic is aggregated into larger and larger streams until at some point the devices trying to feed that server are no longer able to handle just the raw brute force size of the traffic. We've often talked about the way routers work. We're talking about buffer delays and queuing packets and so forth. So if you've got a router with the same speed links in and out, and you've got saturated links in, like 5 saturated links coming in, all trying to route traffic through the 6th link, well, the math is simple. You can't you can't squeeze that 5x traffic through a 1x link. There just isn't a way. So the router understands this. The technology is very robust. Its buffer of packets overflows and it starts dropping packets. What legitimate users experience is an inability for their little microscopic, by comparison, trickle of packet traffic, which is trying to access a site. It just can't compete statistically with this flood of what looks like valid traffic, but is designed in order to flood these aggregation points. What a content distribution network like Akamai uses is an interesting technology. It's something we've never really talked about, and that's Anycast routing. We've often talked about how the job of a router is when a packet comes in, it looks at the destination IP, and it's got a routing table, which contains a series of masked IP addresses, which are associated with different outgoing interfaces. And so its job is to look at the incoming packet and figure out where to send it. That is, out of which interface that packet should then go. Well, this is done in a routing table by matching the most specific route, meaning the route which matches the packet with as large a mask, that is all the 1 bits coming down from the top, and with as small a host name. Well, what that means is that if it's configured correctly, you can put servers all over the internet. That is, well, I'm sorry, I interrupted myself. All over the internet with the same IP. And that changes the topology. Now, even if attackers all over the world are all attacking the same IP address, rather than it physically aggregating at a single location, all of these distributed routers have short routes to local Akamai servers, for example, using Akamai as an example. And so they end up handling the traffic locally and prevent that single point of ultimate failure, because no links these days are able to sustain the kind of denial of service attacks that we're seeing. So, I read a lot of the coverage in the news, and people who support Brian and think he's doing a great job were upset that essentially this attack successfully knocked him off the net. I think it was like last Thursday he announced that Akamai was suspending his service. I guess being neutral in this, certainly I understand Brian's disappointment that a huge sustained DDoS attack was able to push him off the net, but there is a non-zero cost that any bandwidth provider is bearing when they absorb that kind of traffic. We talked a lot in the past about peering agreements between top-tier providers, and the agreement is that there will be pretty much a balance of traffic ingress and egress across peering relationships. But an attack like this completely flips that, and we've talked about, for example, the problems that Netflix has had, because that's an example of a service in the evening that dominates internet traffic in a decidedly one-way direction. And I remember when I was setting up my relationship with Level 3 about a decade ago, they asked me, what's the ratio of your inbound to outbound traffic? And because they would like to have it be 50-50. Well, no server is. GRCs has a lot more people pulling things out than it pulling things in. In fact, there's like zero in inbound, except just the request traffic going in that generates much larger reply responses. So anyway, what Brian ended up doing after being off the net for a while is he managed to get Google's Project Shield to pick him up. And this is something we talked about briefly, but there wasn't much. It was just, I guess we covered it when it was announced. And it's Google's sort of, in the same way they do everything. They're exploring, protecting sites that, under their own criteria, they think deserve to be protected, to be on the internet. For example, sometimes, as in the case with Brian, DDoS attacks are used to silence individuals or news organizations or dissidents or whomever who are taking a controversial position, or who, somebody somewhere wants to shut up. And so Google has said, for free public news profile sites, we will experiment with this thing we call Project Shield. So on their page, they say advanced DDoS protection. Project Shield is built on Google's infrastructure, creating a multi-layer defense system to protect your site against DDoS attacks, including layer 3, 4, and 7 attacks. That is to say, 3 and 4 are just sort of raw brute force bandwidth, just flooding attacks. And layer 7 is protocol level. And see, that's the problem with some of these later attacks is in the old days, they just used to be SYN floods. And the infrastructure got strengthened, so it got smarter about allowing endless numbers of SYN packets, SYN, S-Y-N, for short for synchronized, the first packet in a TCP connection setup. So what's happened is attacks they're still layer 3 and 4 attacks going on, but layer 7 means this is like just a valid HTTP query asking for content. And if enough devices scattered around the internet ask for a server's content, making each of them a valid request, once again, you get just too much bandwidth. There isn't, in this case, the incoming bandwidth probably wouldn't have a problem, but there wouldn't be enough outgoing responding, response bandwidth that allowed everybody to get their answer. And so like 99.999% of the queries would be bogus. And so a little 0.0001% query has almost no chance of getting a page pulled up. So that's a different approach to the denial of service attack issue.
We've had people on from Cloudflare and Alien Vault, and even Akamai come on to This Week in Enterprise Tech. And one of the questions that they get most often is, why does the DOS attack still work? Why does DDoS still work? I mean, it was one of the first that was popularized. It was the first to hit the mainstream consciousness. Shouldn't we have solved it by now? And they all have the same answer, which is, well, the problem is it's not really an attack. It's not an exploit.
All it is overload.
It's just an overload. It's legitimate traffic that you're just ramping up. And in this particular case, they were able to use a lot of compromised edge devices that were able to send legitimate traffic from multiple IPs. So there was no blocking upstream, which is what
Correct.
you hear sometimes when you have an event that's under attack.
There are sort of two issues here, I think. That is, in the press has enjoyed jumping on the whole IoT problem. And, it's we're already getting new acronyms on this podcast for various issues of Internet of Things problems. But there's another problem, and I think it's sort of the superset of the IoT problem. That is, if you had a house full of insecure IoT devices connected by a modem to the internet, 1200 baud or 9600 baud, well, evil as they might be, they couldn't do any damage. The other problem is, the related problem, the enabling problem is consumer bandwidth is skyrocketing. Until I lost my pair of T1s where I was limping along at 3.4 megabits, I don't know how I survived now. I switched to a cable modem. Now I've got 300 downstream and 50 megabits upstream. I mean, one individual, one entity has that kind of bandwidth. And of course, we're seeing this escalation of bandwidth as consumers are demanding greater levels of connectivity in order to support the kinds of services we now want. But with that comes the problem that then those individual endpoints are individually far more capable of participating in devastating DDoS attacks. So yes, them being distributed is important. Them having easily compromisable devices is important. But ultimately, if those things can't talk with high bandwidth to the internet, that doesn't do them any good as attacking components. Well, that problem's been solved because all of our consumer bandwidth is just going up as fast as it can grow.
Steve, also the attackers are getting far more sophisticated in terms of how they hide their attacks. It used to be when you owned a device, all you cared was that you had root access. Now you can make that device do anything you wanted it to. Now they realized, no, I want to own a device and I want it to stay owned for as long as possible. So they will not max out an outgoing connection. They will not max out a device so that it stops responding to its legitimate purpose. In other words, they want the person who buys the X label consumer Internet of Things security camera to be owned and not even notice that, yeah, a little bit of your upstream seems to be leaking out every month. And that's really what's enabled this, because if you get 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 of those devices, there is no mitigation service on the planet that can stop that.
Well, and I don't know how much our listeners look at their own traffic. I have a cute little chart which monitors the SNMP counters in my pfSense router. And it turns out many routers offer SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol, that allows you to watch. When, I mean, I know I've got multiple iPads. I've got, I've got a couple TiVos and computers that are on all the time. The point is, there is constant activity. It's like my network, even when nothing appears to be going on, I'm looking at my switch and router lights. They're never not flickering. They're just flashing all the time. So exactly as you say, Father, if you add a few light bulbs, IoT light bulbs or a couple cameras, how would you even know? As you say, it's able to hide in the noise. And unfortunately, we all now have very noisy networks. And I know that some people are like, okay, I'm going to figure out what all of these streams are. Well, if you don't have a life, okay, go for it. But I mean, some of this stuff is just unknowable. It's going off to random IPs. And it's like, well, I don't know where it went or what's in there. And of course, now it's encrypted more and more, so you can't even see what's going on.
I've always suggested that people, because Wireshark is free and you can get a gigabit tap for relatively little, or use a hub if you can find one on eBay and drop.
Or you just use port mirroring.
Or use port mirroring if you've got a smart switch. And I just tell them, watch your traffic for 24 hours. Just collect packets for 24 hours when nothing is happening. When you're gone on vacation, and you will be surprised how many packets leave your network. And unfortunately, a lot of that is not malicious. A lot of that is just house cleaning that the various devices on your network will do. But as you mentioned, that's a noise floor. And so unless something goes above that noise floor, my tools are not sensitive enough to know, hey, you know what? This one device, it keeps beaconing out to this IRC channel, and then it does stuff. And it's not smart enough to realize, oh, that's command and control. I should probably shut that down.
Right.
And they'll never know. Those devices will always be owned. Those devices will always be compromised, as long as the people who control those botnets don't do something really stupid like max out their attack power.
Yeah. And so you're right. These are, while they're valuable for attackers to have, they don't want to lose them, and they're so easy to get now that the fruit is so low hanging that all they have to do is generate a trickle out of each of their 10,000 webcams, and that gets the job done at the other end, unfortunately.
Yeah. I did a fun little attachment to this. I did manage to get a visit to one of these DDoS protection outfits, one of their data centers down here in Northern California, and it's actually it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to see how they do it, how they use Anycast, which, by the way, is Anycast part of the original Border Gateway Protocol specification, or was that tacked on later on? I was confusing it with CIDR. I know that the addition of CIDR came later because they wanted to create more networks instead of just having class A, B, and C. I don't know whether it was part of 1.0. My guess would be it was not, because it's not the way this internet was originally set up. As we know, the internet purists don't like NAT. Right. The idea that we're going to have a single point that represents multiple devices
sharing an IP, the internet purists say, no, that is breaking the rules. We designed this network so that every device had its own IP. And of course, IPv6 will allow that to happen once again, because finally we have enough bits. But so my guess would be that something like Anycast was an extension added later when the need grew, which didn't initially exist, because it doesn't feel like this kind of addition to BGP would have been, there wouldn't have just been a reason for it at day one.
Right. And so I use Anycast if I'm going from outside in, and I would use VRP, the virtual router redundancy protocol, on my inside to give my clients a redundant gateway. That actually makes sense. We've actually got a good comment in the chat room from Rev Danugi, who says, so now even our dumb networks have to be secure. What's next? And, he's joking, but it is actually a good point, which is in the old days when you were talking about when we were still on dial-up modems. In fact, I remember when I first got my practical peripherals 14.4, it was this little white box with an LCD screen in the front. And it was, oh my gosh, it was heaven. It was so fast.
And it was also flat so that the telephone could sit on top of it.
It had to, because I actually had the one that still had the little dial thing. I had to wire the thing in myself. But, our dumb networks way back when, they didn't have the bandwidth to become a nuisance. Whereas today, my home connection has more power than my corporate connection did 15 years ago. I've got more bandwidth. So my dumb network is suddenly a bigger threat. It's like saying, well, the little kid with a BB gun can't do much, but now we're going to give him a bazooka. That's where we are.
Exactly.
All right, let's get away from bazooka and DDoS. We understand that this is a problem. We understand that the ISPs are dreading the day when they start to see commonplace 1 terabit per second attacks, which is coming. I mean,
and I don't see any mitigation unless we sort of talked about this last week, and I did get a lot of feedback from our listeners when I mentioned that the only thing I could see if it was not legal to allow or ethical to allow infected machines to be tampered with, then to hold ISPs responsible and disconnect them from the internet. A lot of people like the idea. Some people said, ISPs are far from perfect. I'm not sure. In fact, one person sent me his own story where Comcast had been doing that a few years ago, and he got disconnected, though he was absolutely sure that he was not at fault. They just, messed up their detection algorithm one way or the other. So the only thing I can see is that somehow these attacks are raising the visibility, and we're getting more buzz about needing a solution. The problem is, we're steeped in this technology, and if you can make just too many valid queries, then filtering those really becomes a challenge. The only thing I could imagine would be much more caching, so that, for example, the queries being made would end up hitting the cache and not go any further. But then you just do cache busting. You change the URL a little bit. The cache doesn't know if it's valid or not. The query has to go through in order to see, well, maybe it is valid, and you're back there again. So I mean, from everything I've seen, anything someone can propose, we've got, there is an attackable workaround. And the reason, of course, going back to first principles, is it wasn't designed to be resilient against attacks. It was designed on when universities and major businesses were connected to this experimental network, and everyone was amazed it worked at all, rather than, okay, we're designing something for, a 50-year future horizon where the world is unrecognizable from what it is today. Well, that wasn't what they were trying to do. They were just trying to say, hey, can we send a packet from Northern California to Southern California? And they were shocked when it worked. So
that's actually the source of most of our exploits these days, which is something that just worked, and they never thought that it would be misused.
Right.
Security folk, networking folk, by nature, before we got into all the security stuff, we were trusting folk. And now we've seen the error of our ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Steve, let's get away from massive DDoS attacks because I want to go back to a good old-fashioned cluster breach.
Old school security breach.
Old school security breach. This is just someone let everything out. And yeah, we've heard about a lot of breaches over the past couple of years, but this one is of note, not just because of size, but also because of the circumstances behind the disclosure of this breach. Of course, this is Yahoo.
So it, and I'm really not. I'm not interested in the politics. I don't. The problem with that is that there's so much subject to interpretation. That just so people know what that is, the argument is that that executives at Yahoo, Marissa and company, were aware of this breach for as much as 2 years and didn't talk about it publicly. So, of course, that's really misbehavior. When we talk about problems that arise, and I don't mean to use LastPass as anything but a good example, because mistakes can happen. There was a strange problem with, I think it was just Firefox browsers, with the way their extension interacted with something. They had it fixed before it was Tavis Ormandy who found the problem, and he was creating a timeline for like managing this problem, and it was fixed before he had posted the timeline. So that's what you want. We all understand that everyone can have a problem. The question is how quickly and responsibly do you deal with it? That may be a softer standard than some people would like. People would like no problems ever, but we can't do that. So the best we can do is immediately remediate by, for example, informing those who might be affected. In this case, as many as 500 million Yahoo accounts were breached sometime in the past, and they didn't tell anybody. Now, the part that I found interesting, there was a little bit of the technical details, because the good news was that Yahoo has been using a very strong password-based key derivation function known as bcrypt, which is very difficult to accelerate and speed up by design. It was designed for this purpose, so that it would be a memory hard problem that was resistant and resilient against brute force attacks. The bad news is that if you parse Yahoo's announcement, it suggests that most, but on the other hand, these are people who didn't tell us for 2 years, so I'm not sure that their adjectives should be believed completely, but not all of their passwords were hashed with bcrypt. We don't know how many passwords were hashed with not bcrypt, and we don't know what not bcrypt they were using. That is, was it MD5? What did they obsolete and strengthen? The good news is they did strengthen something. The bad news is we don't know. Now, we've seen and we've covered in the past instances where a company exactly with Yahoo's profile implemented stronger password-based key derivation, but for the sake of backward compatibility, left the old hashes there too. Well, okay, so as users signed in, they would migrate the old hash. They would verify with the old hash, and then they would rehash with the new, stronger algorithm. What they should do is then delete the old hash. We know that there have been cases where that was not done, but that's what you have to do in order to evolve from an old hashing scheme to a new one. That is, there needs to be a period of overlap, and because the whole nature of hashing is that you cannot, like, on the server side, Yahoo can't simply change the MD5, if that's what it was, to a bcrypt. They have to wait for that user to log back in to their Yahoo account. And that's the other thing too. I mean, we don't even know how many of these were not just throwaway, because Yahoo is the classic, oh my God, I want to post something to this blog. Must I create an account? Well, I'm not giving them my real email. So you just, get a throwaway account. Yahoo has been a great source of those. So the idea being, though, that they, in order to advance the hash, they have to wait for somebody whose account is currently weakly hashed to provide the plain text password to them. They then hash it with the old algorithm to verify that that's a proper login. Then they take the same plain text and rehash it with the new one and thereby upgrade. So again, it's frustrating that there's so much still not known. So, the takeaway for everyone is the greatest danger would be probably that you've had a Yahoo email account for a long time, like ever. Did you ever make one? And did you ever reuse your password? And unfortunately, everyone used to. Monkey123 was popular for a reason. And so if it's both old, it is probably the password, like what used to be your password. Oh, this is my password, and I use it everywhere I go. It's like, well, we've known for a long time you can't do that. But if there's any other instance where you may have reused that password, that's the vulnerability. Because from this breach, of personal information, it's probable that from what they said, a percentage of those accounts were weakly hashed. And if those were hashed with a weak algorithm, MD5, for example, and Yahoo's been around long enough, it probably was once MD5, then if you had reuse, that's probably where you're vulnerable. And so you definitely want to change the passwords on any accounts, any non-Yahoo accounts that might possibly have ever shared it.
Steve, I'm like you. My Yahoo accounts were always my throwaway accounts. They were the ones that I had just because I wanted a place for junk to go. And I have 5 of them, and none of them have been checked within the last 7 years, would be my guess. But I went back in and I changed all the passwords. When I was at DEF CON, though, there was a very nice gentleman who was explaining to me that he specialized in looking for those throwaway accounts, because he says it's got a couple of points that make it very dangerous. First, throwaway accounts typically don't have really strong passwords because it's something that someone wants to remember. So it is a reused password. Secondly, throwaway accounts, because they are discounted as to their importance, people forget what services they had attached to that account. So if I sign up for a service with a throwaway account and then I just forget about the throwaway account, that email is probably still in there. So they'll know what services they can get into by requesting a password reset, and it will go back to the throwaway account. And it was fascinating. I was talking to this guy for about 45 minutes, and he was telling me about all the different ways that he could use what most people consider digital refuse to ultimately get into that top layer of accounts, the stuff that was actually still active.
Well, and I did see one interesting piece of advice that I appreciated regarding this, and that was, don't retain old email only because you can. Following on from your example, Padre, it is important to recognize that those confirmation emails and so forth, that is a rich repository of your history, which is probably not entirely obsolete, probably not entirely useless. So the fact that these gargantuan email services allow you the luxury of never having to permanently delete something, that's a mixed blessing. It can be useful, but it can also bite you. We've talked about I want to say mail home, mail store home is my favorite little local archiver. And, you know, it's what I do for all of my various GRC based accounts, and the other stuff I'm doing is it's a beautiful index database. And so I run it periodically. It sucks down my email and indexes it and archives it and makes it searchable here. So I still have all the benefit of everything being available, yet not the liability of that everything being out in the cloud. And here's a classic, perfect example of why that's not safe. So if you've got those Yahoo accounts with lots of old emails sitting in them, somebody who can get in there can learn more about you than you would like them to.
Right. That might actually be an interesting exercise for our audience to look through their throwaway accounts to find out what's been left in the deleted items folder, or what's been left in, you know, those folders that you filed away on Yahoo. See how many other accounts those can actually lead into, because I'm betting there are quite a few. And in fact, on mine, I realized that one of my very first throwaway Yahoo accounts I used to verify a Google account, because Google originally, way back when, required another email address for you to be able to establish the account. And so my Yahoo account had the information for the Google account. The Google account actually had the information for an Exchange account. And then the Exchange account led into a folder that could give you access to my password hash. Which I was looking at that going, okay, that's convoluted, and I know where those are, but still, that's way more information that I thought I was giving away.
Well, and, you know, we're not good at saying what if. You know, as we've talked about, it's instructive to say, although a little dark perhaps, to say, you know, what if I die in the next 5 minutes? Literally, like, what if I die? Can my friends and family get to the things that they may need to? That is, you know, planning ahead. Similarly, you challenge yourself by looking at your email berg and say, what if a bad guy got this? I mean, put yourself in that position. Browse through that. What if this was in the hands of someone malicious? What are the consequences? And again, just exactly as you were giving an example of, it's potentially frightening.
Yeah, and I think you're right. We don't like to think about that. Or maybe it's not even that we don't like to think about that. We can't think of that. We're not built to think of worst case scenario. Yeah, go figure. Steve, is it just the standard mitigation practices that we're talking about here? We've got people in the chat room saying, well, okay, if I change my password, if I use a strong password, is that enough? Or do I consider my accounts dead now?
I guess, there's several ways to look at this. One is, how do you feel about Yahoo? There are alternatives to Yahoo. So does their behavior inspire confidence in their future custody of any of your email?
And that answer should be no.
Yeah, it really should be no.
If it took them 2 years to tell me about a massive breach that they've known about for at least that long, then no. I can't actually, there is no way to delete the accounts. You can empty them out, but they stay there, which is wonderful.
Yeah, so to take those accounts then out of service, you empty them all out as much as you possibly can. Then you change their passwords to something insane that you deliberately don't write down, and you will never be able to get back in there again. And you know, you're not going to have a problem with sharing your password. Basically, you're saying, Yahoo, no more. I mean, the reason LastPass still has my confidence is the way they respond to any problems found. That's the flip side of Yahoo, where I'm proud to say I've never had an email account because it just always seemed a little too strange to me. I mean, I just never took them seriously. So, but I also had the advantage of my own domain and email server. So there wasn't much pressure on me to go looking for all other solutions. But still, yeah, I think you're right, Padre. I think that no one, maybe there's some reason you must keep your Yahoo email. In that case, yes, certainly change the password. If you haven't logged in for a long time, knowing what little we know, which is distressingly little because they're just not being as forthcoming even now as they should be, logging in hopefully promotes you to a stronger hash. And at the same time, then change it to a state-of-the-art 20-character mixed character class password managed by a password manager, and you're doing everything you can. That, and maybe just sweep out all of the debris that Yahoo has been holding for you, because other people can get to it potentially.
Yeah, we've got the chat room is starting up a micro flare here right now, because we've got people saying, look, I use Flickr, and we've got PC Guy who's saying Yahoo's not just email people, and I get that, but I think you're dead on, Steve, which is every company will suffer a breach. If you're on the internet, at some point, something will leak that you don't want to leak. The question is, how do you respond to it? And if a company is willing to be 100% transparent, as soon as they know that there's a breach, to let us know that we need to change our authentication credentials, and to keep us up to date about what was taken and what was not, then I'm willing to stick with them. I'm willing to say, okay, yeah, that was a mess up, but you've learned and you're going to do better in the future. There's nothing about the way that Yahoo handled this that makes me want to continue using their services, because I'm just thinking...
And not even providing full disclosure. Yep. Even now, not telling us what we need in order to make a more informed decision. That's what we would want. How to make the best decision. Well, we have to have information. And they're still, don't worry about the man behind the curtain.
Because the man behind the curtain has your password. So, yeah. When we come back, Steve, let's get off Yahoo, because hopefully everyone will be getting off Yahoo in the next couple of weeks. But we need to talk about a security flaw in iOS 10. But before we get there, let's go ahead and thank another sponsor of this episode of Security Now. I get asked a lot, how do I get into IT? I mean, it's a fantastic field. It's got a lot of growth. There are so many upcoming skills that people are trying to learn so that they'll be in the next generation, the next big thing, the next thing that's in demand. It can be a very lucrative and a very rewarding career, but the question is, how do you do it? I mean, the way that I did it was I just started doing it because I could, because that was the time, that was the era. It was brand new to everybody. All the gear was brand new. All the services were brand new. All the terminology was brand new. But these days, it's a bit more challenging. You can't just become an apprentice. You can't just buy all the gear out there. You can't just learn the software on your own. Sometimes you're going to need a little help. And that's why I'm so happy to have IT Pro TV as a sponsor of Security Now. Now, IT Pro TV is the best repository on the net for experienced cybersecurity professionals, for IT managers, for people who are just learning how to refresh their IT skills. They've got over 1,000 hours of content and more than 30 that are added every week. You can stream courses live and on demand worldwide to your Chromecast, your Roku, Amazon Fire TV, your Apple TV, or your PC. That means that you can learn at your own pace, on the go, online or off. Now, you can also include courses like Certified Information Security System Professional, CompTIA Security Plus, CompTIA A+, and Ethical Hacking version 9 if you're looking to do a certificate. Their October courses will include topics like CCNA routing and switching, installation, storage, and compute with Server 2016, Windows operating fundamentals, Red Hat Linux, networking with Server 2016, and more. One of the features that I really enjoy, because I use IT Pro TV as more of a reference for when I've forgotten a couple of things that I need, is their transcripts. They give you complete transcripts of all their courses. This means that rather than having to watch an entire series of videos, you could jump specifically to the specific part of a video that you need to get the answer to your question. That means you get in, you get out, and you get back to work. They also give you more than 100 step-by-step virtual machine labs and transcender practice exams. That's a $109 value. You can take advantage of their low monthly subscription price and no-hassle cancellation policy. And while subscriptions are still the best value by far, they offer their courses on Amazon Video Direct in case you want to try before you really get into it. Now, if you're currently signed up for an enterprise account with an IT Pro TV competitor, good news. If they subject you to a rate increase, IT Pro TV will match your previous year's pricing on that account. That means that you and your team can learn at an affordable rate. Their clients include Harvard, MIT, UCSD, Stanford, and more. If they trust IT Pro TV, shouldn't you too? Visit itpro.tv/security now to access the most popular IT certifications on the planet. Premium subscriptions are normally $57 a month or $570 for the year, but we've got a special offer. Try it free for 7 days when you sign up using our code SN30. You'll also receive 30% off the lifetime of your account. That's less than $40 per month or $399 for the entire year. Again, just visit itpro.tv/security now. That's itpro.tv/security now and use the code SN30 to try it free for 7 days. Plus, save 30% off the life of your account. And we thank IT Pro TV for their support of Security Now. All right, Steve, it's not all DDoSes and breaches. There's a little mischief going on in the latest version of iOS.
So, yeah, we've discussed Elcomsoft a number of times in the past. They're a relatively well-known security firm who sells iPhone cracking commercial software. So a security researcher at Elcomsoft, Oleg Afonin, he discovered a flaw in the password hashing used to protect iOS 10's backups. And I would love to know what's really going on here. And I'll explain why what makes me so curious. But what he discovered is that iOS 10's backups, that is the brute forcing of the password. We've just been talking about password-based key derivation functions. So it's where you deliberately use a technology to make them slow. He realized that with moving from iOS 9 to iOS 10, it was 2,500 times faster, which is to say easier, to brute force a local iOS 10 backup than it had been under iOS 9. Now, unfortunately, because of the nature of his commercial enterprise, he irresponsibly disclosed his discovery publicly without first notifying Apple. They immediately did get in touch with him and said, "What? What?" And then he, told him what he knew, but the cat was out of the bag first. So here's what he wrote, and I'm quoting it because I don't want to paraphrase this, because what he said is really interesting. He said, "When working on an iOS 10 update for Elcomsoft's Phone Breaker," one of their products, "we discovered an alternative password verification mechanism added to iOS 10 backups. We looked into it and found out that the new mechanism skips certain security checks, allowing us to try passwords approximately 2,500 times faster compared to the old mechanism used in iOS 9 and previous."
Wow.
This new attack vector is specific to password-protected local backups produced by iOS 10 devices. The attack itself is only available for iOS 10 backups. Interestingly, he writes, the new password verification method exists in parallel. This is why I would love to know what's really going on. Exists in parallel with the old method, which continues to work with the same slow speed as before. So, okay, what was Apple thinking? So, continuing, by exploiting the new password verification mechanism, we were able to support it in our latest update, Elcomsoft Phone Breaker 6.10. Since this is all too new, there is no GPU acceleration support, in parens, yet, for the new attack. However, even without GPU acceleration, the new method works 40 times faster compared to the old method with GPU acceleration. This, they write, is extra troublesome. And here's another juicy nugget, because decrypting a backup is currently the only way of cracking modern non-jailbroken phones. And even a jailbreak will not expose the keychain's protections, but decrypting a backup will. So within the iPhone cracking break-in community, backup encryption is the golden goose. And then he provides in his blog posting a little table showing under iOS 9 with GPU iOS 9 CPU only using an Intel i5, they can do 2,400 passwords per second brute force. Also iOS 9, but adding GPU acceleration, in this case an NVIDIA GTX 1080, that 2,400 jumps to 150,000 passwords per second. And now, okay, so iOS 9 with state-of-the-art GPU acceleration, 150,000 password guesses per second, brute forcing, cracking the backup password encryption.
That's pretty good. 150,000 per second, yeah.
Now we move to iOS 10 with just CPU. That is, they've weakened it so much that back to that Intel i5 that was only able to do 2,400 passwords per second on iOS 9, 6 million
Holy
passwords per second just with the i5. So if we assume this scales linearly, you know, look at the 2,400 to 150,000. What is that, about 70 to 1? So that probably puts us at what, 4.2 billion passwords per second. So pretty much the entire IP space of the internet per second, you could do brute forcing under iOS 10 with GPU.
Okay, so if I understand it, the original, the hard encryption, along with every guess, there was a little bit of work that your system had to do. It asked you basically to do some math. Are you saying they took that part out in the backup? You no longer have to do the math. You could just brute force the guesses.
Well, he's being deliberately obscure, and this hasn't been published because, you know, he says, you know, he wants to sell his software as much as he can before Apple fixes this. And they're running around frantically in Cupertino right now, like saying, oh, shoot, or worse. So all he says is certain security tests were bypassed. But what's curious is that what this says is, I mean, from you know, if we take what he wrote, and I'm sure it's accurate, exactly as written, that for some reason they're doing both. Now, there are reasons for both. We were just talking about, you know, the notion, for example, of Yahoo moving from an old hash to a new hash. So maybe they thought this was better, but they broke it. Or I don't know. But somehow the new one is far weaker. So any iOS 10 backup is apparently dual hashed. The password is double hashed with the old algorithm and the new algorithm. Normally it's new and improved. In this case, it's new and catastrophic. But the fact is, you don't need to even worry about the slow old one because you've got a much easier, fast new one that you can use to do your brute force attacking. And both of them are hashing the same backup password. So either one, the fastest one to finish, gives you what you want. And in this case, it's the new one, which would finish much quicker.
Wow.
It's like, again, there's a mystery here. We don't have the details. maybe we'll get them someday when someone reverse engineers this, figures out what's going on. And we know that Apple is not big on telling us in detail about their mistakes. They just say, there's a new 10.0.3. Please download it immediately.
To their credit, though, they've acknowledged, like, okay, yeah, this was a mistake. This is something we're going to fix.
Immediately acknowledge it.
Yeah, if it had been another company, they might say, well, we'll fix it in 2 years because we don't think anything's going to happen bad between now and then.
Well, and so what this does mean, too, is that any local backups made by this iOS 10, those need to be considered dangerous. That is, that backup needs to be destroyed, like maybe immediately, and then just refrain from backing up locally until you've got 10.0.3 or whichever update fixes it. I think we're at 0.2 right now. So yeah, maybe 0.3. But you want to make sure that that backup is destroyed, because it's a statically sitting, brute forceable, complete image of your phone, which significantly also contains the keychain. And if you crack the backup, you crack the keychain, which even a jailbreak won't give you. And then you've got literally the keys to the kingdom. So any backups, any local backups made under iOS 10, 0.2, well, 10.0 to 10.2, need to be considered, like a ticking time bomb. You want to make sure those don't persist.
Right. And even after you update your software, you really should delete those old backups, because they will still sit there.
Exactly.
Especially if they get moved over to, say, a time machine. Yay. All right. More iPhone news, because it's not just about really fast hashing here.
Well, so I love this one, because the people covering the story picked up on the fact that Luca Todesco is a teenager. And so the headlines were how quickly he did this. And, it's like apparently in less than a day. And so I could sort of imagine the conversation in the evening in his household, where his parents say, now, Luca, you can crack your new iPhone 7 after you've finished your homework. And he says, but Mom, a new crack is worth up to $200,000. And his parents say, well, yeah, that's nice, dear, but geography is important too. You need to know where Aleppo is if you're going to be president someday. So anyway, the story here is that within 24 hours of obtaining his new iPhone 7, a well-known teenage hacker who has successfully, he's got a reputation in the hacker community, and which is why everyone believes him. He's not published details. He's achieved it. He says he wants to polish it and do a better job with handling all the details of the attack. There was a classic one years ago where you could simply go to a web page and the attack was entirely supported by Safari. So a web server was able to deliver payload that would, just visiting that page, would jailbreak the phone. I don't know that this one can be reduced to that, but that was referred to in some of the coverage here, where he was saying, I want to clean it up and polish it. Yes, I got my 7 jailbroken. And what's interesting is that he wants a jailbroken phone, because not to sell the exploit or to do evil, but because he is truly interested in poking around. He is a teenage security researcher, and it's very valuable for him to have root on his phone. In fact, in his little video that he produces, he brings up a root console, which he's then able to use to poke around. So he's annoyed that Apple won't give developers an official means for having that level of access to their phone. So he gets it for himself after dinner, and hopefully after doing his homework, and then plays with his hacking his phone after school.
Yeah, that's not a bad hobby. A hobby that gets an extra $200,000.
Well, this is the kind of kid you want to hire.
Yeah, right.
I mean, absolutely. It's somebody who's actually there, really reverse engineering and digging in. I mean, I have no doubt that Luca knows his stuff, and and I don't have any doubt that he'll have no problem getting a job.
Right, right. And, there actually is a little bit of a tradition of doing the right thing that we've seen the last few years. You may remember Zimperium X. They're the ones who found the stage fright bug. And they could have sold that for 7 figures. They really, in fact, they could still be selling it because it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's the exploit that will never be completely patched. But they disclosed it responsibly to Google for $1,337. And the only reason why they asked for that amount was so that it would spell out leet.
Leet, of course.
Yeah. So some people really just want to be curious and then do the right thing. And hopefully Luca's like that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. We've been hammering a lot on Apple. And I think we need to do some fair time here and talk a little bit about Microsoft because...
Well... Yeah, and this isn't really a hammer. This actually surprised people, and I wanted to make sure that our listeners know. I meant to look because I think we're right on the cusp of. Let me refresh the Never 10 download count. Yes. Oh my God. No. 1,999,138 downloads. I was thinking by the podcast time we would have crossed 2 million. Where it's slowed down to only 3,666 downloads per day. So maybe by the end of the podcast, we will have crossed 2 million downloads. But of course, it's been phenomenally popular because a lot of people said, no, thank you. For whatever reason, I want to stay where I am. Somewhat controversially, I never fought with the GWX, the Get Windows 10, because and I looked at doing so, and we've discussed this on the podcast in the past, there is no API, no means for a program to say to its own system that where it's running, please don't download this update. Because if you think about it, what would malware want to do? So of course, any malware would want to hook onto an API that gave it control over updates to Windows that might raise Windows awareness of that malware. So this is one area where Microsoft is adamant at minimizing programmatic control. Well, so I hit that. I understood why there wasn't an API, and I said, okay, I can't prevent this Get Windows 10, which was being offered through the Windows Update, which is supposed to be security, controversially, but wasn't, as we all know. So all I did was I leveraged the existing registry options, which at least told Windows, the GWX, don't do anything. Just sit there and squat on some hard disk space, but don't even think about updating updating the system to Windows 10. I don't want it. So the good news is Microsoft just released a formal remover. For anybody who wants to find it, there is a link in the show notes, or just look for, and here's the key number. It's 318-4143. So it's KB, knowledge base, KB 318-4143. And they describe it as, this update removes the Get Windows 10 app and other software related to the Windows 10 free upgrade offer that expired on July 29th, 2016. For a complete list of the software removed by this Windows update, see the update replacement information. And on that page, you'll find 4 links for Win 7 and Win 8.1 in each of 32 and 64-bit system flavors. So That's and I just haven't had a chance, but I'm planning to post this on the Never 10 page formally, just so that it's people who are for whatever reason wanting Never 10. Actually, I've been told, because I've argued that it's not useful anymore. It's like, why are people still downloading it? Well, one of the things it does is it intelligently finds the one update that fixes the Windows update problem and installs it for you. And so people are saying, yeah, we just use that now as the easier way to find that Windows update. And it's like, okay. But anyway, so I will update the page after the podcast today with this link there, because anyone who wants Never 10 certainly would be interested in just running this and finally removing that lingering debris, which otherwise isn't removed. And I don't know that this needs to be sought. Actually, when I turned on my Win 7 machine, which I use for Skype, I did see that there were some updates. I failed to see whether this one was being offered. So maybe this is automatic. People may want to go do it right now when they hear this, or maybe Microsoft will ultimately be just pushing this out in the channel, and the GWX will just dissipate from their systems on its own, which would be the right thing to do. So I imagine that's probably what they're doing. But at this point, it looks like it's a go get it if you really are serious.
By the way, Paul Thurrott did mention last week on Windows Weekly that you still can get the Windows 10 upgrade for free if you are on 7 or 8 or 8.1. That even though the offer is expired, you can still do it. I just rolled back all my machines from 10. I had a few on 10.
I heard that yesterday. You were talking about this. I guess on Sunday.
I just, it was one of these things where I was willing to put up with so many of the little quirks and foibles of Windows 10, because I actually do kind of like the OS. A few things like the sticky borders and the fact that the registry edits don't work anymore really bugged me. But what finally did it was the fact that I have active hours set on my machines so that it doesn't do any updates while I'm working. And evidently, this last big update ignored that. Either Microsoft thought it was so important, or it was just not set up properly. So this machine went into its update, and no notification, no ability to cancel it, just a notice saying, do not turn off your machine in the middle of a show. It delayed the show by 30 minutes because this had all the tools that I needed to get to. And there was no way to stop it. There was no way to cancel it. And if you turn off a Windows machine in the middle of an upgrade, it will bork it. And
Thank God you're not a heart surgeon.
I know, right? But then I got home and I thought, okay, maybe I messed up active hours. Maybe that was me. And so I checked before I started that night's video editing. I checked my active hours, made sure they were still on. I'm like, okay, I'm good. And in the middle of the video edit, it did the same thing. It dropped into the update screen. I'm screaming at it, going, I didn't even save any of my work. I lost an hour and a half of work because Windows just decided now is a good time for it to update. And I'm thinking, you know what? It might be a bug, and I'm willing to say Microsoft could fix it, but no. If your OS thinks that it's more important than the work I'm doing on the OS, we can't use you. Yeah, I guess I'm a Never 10 now.
Well, it'll stabilize. I don't have any doubt that it'll stabilize. We've seen this history of Microsoft going from good versions to bad versions. Normally, it's an every other one. I think they've got two turkeys in a row in this case. The problem, of course, is now they're saying there's not going to be an 11. We're just stuck with 10. But the other thing, the other new thing about this is that they're moving towards the software as a service, and this now becomes an OS as a service, because one way or the other, if people are not going to upgrade, they're going to figure out a way to turn us into revenue streams. So
right.
I'm happy at 7.
Okay, let's propel ahead a little bit, because OpenSSL has a little issue that I think our Security Now folk need to know about.
So the problem with the problem with OpenSSL is it is old, and that's not good, and huge, and that's not good, and bloated, and that's not good, and the work product of countless, literally countless developers. That's not good. And incredibly difficult to maintain. The good news is, it is, for better or for worse, it is our industry's go-to de facto standard SSL, TLS, and related privacy and encryption and authentication development and testing platform. That's where these technologies go to get their first life. And so it's sort of the galactic standard for everything, which again is a mixed blessing, which is why we're now seeing new packages. Amazon has one, for example, there because of AWS and everything that they're doing. They just said, okay, we're not going to have that blob, which is just, it's become unknowable on our servers. And the other problem is, every single feature, every possible widget and gizmo and gadget, which anybody had an itch to scratch, added to the formal specification, it's in OpenSSL. So the good news is, if you want it, it is there. The bad news is, if you don't want it, it is there. And we know what a problem complexity is. So this is yet another instance where again, a mistake was found, it was immediately fixed. So again, the kind of response we want from an important mission-critical package like OpenSSL is what we got. What we're seeing, though, is that its role is changing. It's now the standard testing bench for new stuff, where it makes sense to, just graft another barnacle onto this thing in order to test the protocol. But increasingly, people are saying, we just don't need all of that for our web server. So we're going to do another one. And we're going to, by only implementing the features that actually ended up being in use. That's the other thing that OpenSSL represents, is the entire exploration through history of internet connection, privacy, and authentication. So, obsolete stuff is there because everything is added in a forward and a backward compatible fashion. So stuff that nobody uses any longer is there. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be. We need one of those. I just don't think it ought to be used in production as much as it is. But it's the default de facto standard still for the internet, because maybe we'll need to turn that switch on or use that. So in this case, I talked a couple years ago in detail about certificate revocation. One of the protocols that is really interesting. In fact, where I ended up coming down on the whole issue is stapling. OCSP stapling is the solution. The idea there is, okay, OCSP is the online certificate status protocol. And it provides a means by which a web browser can, when it receives certificates from a server, can, in real time, on the spot, query the issuing authority for the validity of that certificate. So there are extra fields in the certificate providing the URL for that certificate's OCSP server. The browser then gets it, and if you've turned that on, we've talked about this, Firefox has supported it, and a lot of our listeners turned it on for a while. Google had some problems, surprisingly, with their own OCSP servers not being reliable enough. They often didn't answer. And that was one of the controversies was, well, if we don't get an affirmative yay or nay, what do we do? And for the sake of user experience and the fact that OCSP servers weren't at that time, and maybe even now, reliable enough, it would be a fail open. It would be, well, we couldn't get a no, it's definitely bad, so we're gonna go ahead and accept it. Okay, stapling solves this problem. It is a beautiful solution. I think it's where we're ultimately going to be, and that is that the server that is issuing the certificate also provides a sufficiently recent OCSP status reply with the certificate. So the website says, here's my identity and a recent revalidation of that assertion. So the beauty is that changes the connectivity. Instead of there being a triangle where your browser goes to the server, gets the certificate, then your browser goes to the CA and gets that. Instead, now we're reusing the existing connection. And the server, the web server, notices that its OCSP validation is getting old. And what could that mean? That could be minutes or hours or days, but it's going to be a relatively short time, because then it reaches out to the CA and updates and gets a new time-stamped, signed by the certificate authority, reassertion of its certificate's continued validity. So that's the way the system works. What this means in terms of implementation is that a browser which is configured for it is able to explicitly ask the server to provide a stapled OCSP status response. And so what happened was that, of course, this all got implemented in OpenSSL. That's where it first started breathing, and it has since. Turns out there was a little mistake made in the code where, and I would call this a classic edge case. So it's on the server side. A malicious client could leverage this edge case by causing, essentially, in fact, I'll read from the OpenSSL post. A malicious client can send an excessively large OCSP status request extension. So that's an extension to the TLS protocol where, some additional fields that says, I'm aware of OCSP stapling. Please send it back to me if you can. If that client continually requests renegotiation, sending a large OCSP status request extension each time, then there will be an unbounded memory growth on the server. This will eventually lead to a denial of service attack. Now, that's not a DDoS, that's a DOS. And we'll clarify that in a second. They continue saying, through memory exhaustion, servers with a default configuration are vulnerable even if they do not support OCSP. So the fact that they're using that version of OpenSSL that offers the feature, even if they don't turn it on, they can still be brought down. So there's three different tracks of OpenSSL. There's 1.1.0, which needs now to be updated, and that's, of course, 1.1 is the latest, needs to be updated to 1.1.0a. Then there's 1.01, and those users need to go to 1.01u, and 1.0.2, and those users need to go to 1.0.2i. I get nightly security reports from my Unix machines, and they immediately informed me that there was a new version of OpenSSL available. So it's been propagated. It was immediately fixed. I mean, it was a trivial thing to fix. So basically, it was a memory leak where a client, it was discovered that a client could deliberately cause OpenSSL to request blocks of memory over and over and over, never freeing previous blocks, by both leveraging this flaw in the OCSP handling coupled with renegotiation of the connection. So those two together sort of slipped by the original testers, and this got fixed. And so essentially what it does is the system just keeps giving the memory to OpenSSL, which is running with tremendous privileges in the system, so that that process bloats and bloats and bloats and bloats until memory requests start failing for other legitimate processes. And the so-called denial of service in this case is that the web server, which has grown to the entire size of the server's memory, no longer has any memory available to service additional requests.
The ever-expanding memory blob.
Exactly. Yeah, so just, it's not one of our horrible remote exploit, end of the world meltdown problems, but not good. But immediately fixed.
Right. Now, if you didn't do that, if you didn't always reserve that memory, you would run into jelly bean problems, right? I mean, eventually, because you'd start releasing memory that still contained sensitive bits.
Well, we don't really know what's in there. For example, the OCSP, if it's just the OCSP response, that's public domain. So it's an assertion signed with the certificate authority's public key. So that's freely available. I mean, any browser can ask for one from a certificate authority. So if that's what is there, then it's just a mistake. But maybe the information is contains something sensitive, but in this case, it really doesn't matter. It's going to bring the server down. Somewhere in the renegotiation logic, they forgot when they allocated a new block of memory to service the renegotiated connection. There's just like one line of code missing, which was release the old connection's outstanding allocation. So easy to do. Mistakes happen, and these guys did fix it as quickly as they could. And again, I want to make sure people understand. OpenSSL is the reference standard, but due to all of its history, it's no longer really becoming what you want to use in a production environment. You want to test new things there, and then selectively move them maybe over to a much leaner armature that you then use for actual work. Just because who knows what we haven't found? That's the thing. It is, we continually find problems in it, and it should be no surprise to anyone. It's just too big. It's too old. It's too complicated. It's just, and we've talked about the alternative TLS stacks, which are 1/200th the size. I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of lines of code compared to 6,000. It's like, okay, if this 6,000 line system solution does everything we need, thank you. We're done.
Speaking of done, let's move on a little bit, because this next story is actually something that I'm very interested in, because we've talked a lot about it over the last couple of weeks, and that is, what do you do when a CA misbehaves? Of course, certificate authorities are the way that we learn how to trust on the internet, and of late, we've seen some CAs do some very, very peculiar, if not downright malicious behavior. Now, Steve, you know this. You know that trying to revoke the authority of a CA is very difficult. In fact, it's been almost impossible. It's one of the biggest reasons why people are saying we need to move over to DNS Dane so that we can start doing self-issuance of certificates and just forget the CA system altogether. But we've got sort of a good news, bad news thing with WoSign. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we talked about this in detail a couple of weeks ago, where and the framing of our discussion then was I wanted to and did share Mozilla's thought process essentially with our listeners, because exactly as you say, there is big financial impact when a major browser like Firefox or Chrome or IE or Edge decides to pull the plug on trust with a certificate authority. Essentially, they're out of business because they're no longer, who's going to buy a cert from them when there's a competitive marketplace and there are other certificate authorities which are trusted by all the browsers. So it's game over. So politically, from a bureaucratic standpoint, this has to be done carefully. So a couple of weeks ago, we sort of went through phase one of that. And what popped up and I caught this in a post by someone who follows me, Vincent Lynch, who's very much involved in and follows the certificate authority industry very closely. He summed it up saying, Mozilla now believes that StartCom, and remember, there's also this weird WoSign StartCom connection where we discovered that changing a post parameter at StartCom would cause it to issue a WoSign certificate. So it's like, what? I mean, this is just all stinky. So he said, Mozilla now believes that StartCom purposefully backdated an SHA-1 certificate for a payment processing company in flagrant violation of the certificate, the CA browser industry, the so-called CAB forum rules. And so Vincent linked to today's update from Mozilla. And again, this is all out in the open for public comment. They don't want to hide anything because they recognize the consequences of them doing this are severe. But if we don't hold certificate authorities accountable, then the system really collapses. So Mozilla wrote, today, Mozilla is publishing an additional document containing further research into the backdating of SHA-1 certificates in violation of the CAB forum baseline requirements to avoid browser blocks, meaning that they now have clear evidence that WoSign backdated certificates. Remember that there's a valid after and valid until fields. And no browser today will accept an SHA-1 signed certificate that appears to have been issued after the start of this year. That is, with a valid after date in 2016. So that can cause problems. We've talked about the problems that can cause. So you can imagine that there would be pressure to issue a certificate with a previous date. And in this case, it was December 20th, I think. I remember it was like 10 days before the end of the year, this certificate appeared. So Mozilla continues saying, it also contains, that is this write-up, some conclusions we have drawn from the recent investigations and a proposal for discussion regarding the action that Mozilla's root program should take in response, taking into account all of the issues listed above, Mozilla's CA team has lost confidence in the ability of WoSign / StartCom to faithfully and competently discharge the functions of a CA. Therefore, we propose that, starting on a date to be determined in the near future, Mozilla products will no longer trust newly issued certificates issued by either of these two CA brands. We plan to distrust only newly issued certificates to try to reduce the impact on web users, as both of these CA brands have substantial outstanding certificate corpuses. And should that be corpi? Anyway. Okay, so once again, we see this careful, methodical march to removing trust. And so the nice thing about, I mean, they're doing the right thing. They're not saying we're going to retroactively distrust. We're not going to yank the certificates, the roots out of our store. Rather, we're going to add some code to see if the certificate is otherwise valid. When was the valid after date? So essentially putting them out of business on Firefox, and other browsers will likely follow, because again, this is community connected, so that they're no longer able to issue certificates in the future, which will be trusted. But that also protects the investments made by everyone who has an existing certificate. And what that means is that when it's time to renew, they will go somewhere else. And Mozilla did say that they maybe a year from now, they will revisit this. But just to remind people, it wasn't just this flaky website and this one backdated certificate. When we covered this a couple of weeks ago, there were like 6 different, separate, isolated problems. Among them, many certificates had been misissued, and they didn't report that in their required auditing, and only revoked the ones that they were explicitly notified of they had to revoke, rather than, as they should have, going back through their own records and retrospectively revoking anything which they could determine had been misused and was subject to abuse. They didn't do any of that. So, I mean, goodbye. I'm not going to miss them. And again, websites can just get the certificate from someone else. We have to hold certificate authorities accountable. And so we're seeing played out here, in public, the necessary bureaucratic drama of creating a careful case and then ultimately saying, okay, we're sorry.
Steve, I'm with you. I think CAs absolutely need to be held accountable for what they do. The question I would have, though, is looking into the future, how do you do that? I mean, this is an isolated case, and this took a while. I mean, this company did a lot of really bad things before finally
over and over,
and they got little slaps on actually not even slaps on the wrist really, until finally there was enough oomph in the community to say, okay, we have to do something about this. But you can't do that for every CA that goes off the reservation. I mean, it just takes too long, and in the interim, you've got this massive security hole because the entities you're supposed to trust are not trustworthy. And then I could see this evolving because we already know that there have been a couple of CAs who have been in bed with nation-state level entities.
Yep.
And I could see this becoming a cause to fracture the internet, where you have nation-states saying, well, if you don't trust our CAs, we're not trusting your CAs. And I mean, that unfortunately, it sounds childish, but that's not unheard of. This sort of tit for tat happens all the time. Yeah. So is the only way out of this to move to DNSSEC and DNSDane?
Ultimately, and we talked about this last week, everyone knows what a fan I am of DNSSEC. and Dane is one of the many benefits that we will get once we have DNS secured throughout the entire system. I don't begrudge anybody, any entrepreneur, the opportunity of starting up a certificate authority. But it's not as if the field is so rarefied that we need another one in order to, for example, bring the price down. There's plenty. It's not like we're in a monopoly situation where, everyone's having to get theirs from VeriSign, for example. So it's like, I'm not going to miss them. And they probably have loyal followers who are going to miss them. But unfortunately, the trust was misplaced. And we have a system, and I agree with you, Father. What you're basically saying is, the system is based on trust, and it's not a strong enough assertion.
Right.
Trust is not strong enough. And as you note, it's also not completely resilient in the face of fracturing, different types of fracturing of the internet. But today, it's what we have. And those guys can go away. Their customers will simply move to one of the other 400 certificate authorities, and I'm sure get the same kind of price that they would have from these guys. So they had an opportunity to make some money. They did for a while. They weren't responsible. And because this is entirely resting on trust and behavior, I mean, that's the obligation that comes with basically printing money. The certificate authorities perform a very valuable service. Everybody knows I'm a huge fan of DigiCert. They are my CA. I'm never moving away from them. I'm so happy with the job they do. And they earn the money they're making, but they're selling bits. And it's like, wow, that's a great job if you can get it. And so, unfortunately, WoSign they blew their opportunity of selling bits for dollars. It's like, okay, sorry, with that printing money capability comes the obligation of printing it responsibly.
They killed the cow to have a steak, basically. And actually, I'd go one step further. It's not just that the system is built on trust that may not be there. Unfortunately, for most of the world, the CA system is built on ignorance of the process.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, you say CA to most people who don't watch Security Now or the Twit TV network, and they'll just sort of glaze over and say, I have a padlock in my browser. That's okay, right? And that's it. That's the extent of their knowledge.
I will never forget the podcast. I don't know which number it was, but we're at 579 today. So, but it was many years ago when, between podcasts, I had for some reason looked into the CA root in a Windows machine. And I remember when there were 12 certificates in there. I mean, VeriSign was there, Global Trust was there, and a couple other companies that sort of, I didn't know they were in the CA business, but I mean, you didn't have many more fingers than there were certificates in a Windows machine. And one week between podcasts, I looked in there and the scroll thumb went down into this little itty bitty thing. And I thought, what? And I started dragging it down, and hundreds of trusted roots go by. And with the next podcast, I said, oh my God, Leo, what has happened? And then we did a podcast talking about the consequence of this explosion of certificate authorities, that it is a trust everyone based model. And unfortunately, the more everyone's you have, any single point of failure cripples the entire system. So again, the only response to that is a zero tolerance policy.
Zero tolerance, and Zero trust. Is there another way to say zero trust? I just
Trust who?
Trust very few people. Trust just a few. I don't know. Yeah, we'll figure that out later on. All right, we do need to push on because we're not going to get to any Q&A in this Q&A.
No, we're not.
episode.
We will do that tomorrow for next week's podcast.
But we still do have something fun here. We get to talk about Bittorrent Sync. This is one of the services that many members of the Twit family were asking us to cover on Know-How, and it's interesting. I used it once or twice. It wasn't really my flavor anymore. It was renamed. Does that also mean that it's a new being?
Okay, so they've renamed it Resilio. I guess as in resilience, Resilio, Resilio. So Resilio is the new name for Bittorrent Sync. And from the first day of announcement, our listeners have said, oh my God, Steve, what is it? Give us an analysis, like you do when you have the information, so you can explain it to us and tell us we can use it, because it looks wonderful. And so I immediately got in contact with the BitTorrent PR guy, and I said, hey, look, I'm not buying anything. I know who BitTorrent is. What I want is the white paper for the documentation. And instead, he said, we just put a brand new monument in the front of our building, and it's 4 inches marble, and it's a beautiful italic font. And I said, no. What is the protocol? Oh, well, we've got this great team of, blah, 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 blah. I mean, and finally I told him, stop sending me your press releases. All I want is the technology. Never got it. They published a non-white paper about a year ago. Still nothing. Now, they've done it again, which is what got it onto the show notes. There's a white paper. Actually, it's not white. It's fancy. It's got marble italics font, just like the monument in front of the building. They call it Resilio Sync Security and Privacy Brief. Notice it doesn't say privacy specification. The good news is it's not too brief. So there is a huge demand for this podcast to say something about what used to be Bittorrent Sync and is now Bittorrent Resilio. I think there's enough there for me to at least discuss what they're willing to say. Again, that falls far short of, okay, here are the protocols. For example, Telegram could say everything that these guys have said, and from that, it would look wonderful. But when I actually saw the block diagram of the Telegram architecture, I said, holy crap, this is the biggest crock I have ever seen. And not long afterwards, the rest of the security community agreed. And so the problem is, as we know, the devil is in the details. And for whatever reason, they're not publishing it. And the only reason I can imagine is competitive. I don't think they think there's anything wrong. But unfortunately, those who create it are not those who need to judge it. Right. And I imagine they don't want competition. They don't want the compatible products to be created. There was some effort a couple years ago at reverse engineering it. There's something called the Initial Protocol Specification, actually hosted in a forum on their site, dated the July of 2013, so 3 years back, where someone took some time to dig around and work on it. I sort of thought more than that existed today, but I thought there was a working BitTorrent Sync compatible implementation, but just in looking briefly, I didn't see it anywhere. But I just wanted to put it on people's radar. I will find some time, in a future podcast before long to dig into it, and we will finally do a podcast not on BitTorrent Sync, because we waited long enough for it to become BitTorrent Resilio. And I'll share what there is to share, but I'm still annoyed because, and as you said, Padre, it's closed. Not your cup of tea. Not mine either. There's something called Sync Thing, which a lot of people seem to be liking, and I believe that's completely open. Right. And that's what you want. So if these guys got competition from a knowable open alternative, I can't think of anybody who would deserve it more.
And the thing is not just that it's closed, it's that what they've opened, what they've let us take tiny little peeks into how this handles encryption. It's not impressive.
No. It's the PR guy. Oh, yeah, well, we got military-grade encryption, and John McAfee said it's wonderful.
Okay. Let's see. John McAfee was the man who invited me to come to a strip club for Black Hat at Vegas.
How well does he know you, Padre?
Well, no. This was an invitation to all the journalists, and who went? Ian Thompson actually went, and
of course he did.
And he was asking me if I went. I'm like, are you kidding me? John McAfee asked me to come to a strip club. I'm like, okay, this is like a red flag had a baby with warning tape. Just no, you stay far, far away from that. And it turned out, yeah, it was really that bad. It was a really skeevy club. I guess they're all kind of skeevy. And he showed up like 2 hours late and then didn't want to talk about anything. So, yay.
Well, and Showtime has a documentary, produced it. My TiVo sucked it in, and I keep forgetting that it's there. But it was called, it had a short name, and then The Dangerous Life of John McAfee. And so if anyone, if I did tweet about it, I think it aired for the first time on Saturday night on Showtime. And so for what it's worth, I'm glad it came up because if anyone's curious, it's a 2-hour documentary. John has said it's all lies, full of lies. So it sounds like it was probably going to be fun.
Love him or hate him, he's a very interesting person.
Yes, he is entertaining.
He is entertaining.
I did want to correct the record, just for the sake of accuracy. I misspoke last week when we were talking about OSs and routers by saying that pfSense and the Ubiquity router were both FreeBSD based. I know better. Ubiquity uses Debian. We've talked about that in the past. Someone said, Steve, no. And it's like, okay, you're right. Sorry about that. So I just wanted to close that dangling mistake.
Naturally.
2 bits of miscellany. I did want to put also on people's radar a science fiction program on NBC beginning week after next on October 3rd called Timeless. Time travel. I don't know much. I'm not recommending it, but for anybody, I'm going to record it and hope that it's engaging and fun. Time travel is neat stuff. I think the bad guy is that the actor who played Luca on ER. So yeah, I'm dating myself. But it just it's going to be made. It's a network show. I'm sure it's not going to be deep sci-fi, but it looks fun. Apparently the plot is that a state-of-the-art time machine is stolen by this bad actor who with the intent of going back in time and messing up the past. But there's a prototype of it also. And so the good guys, use that and go chase them around. So anyway, for what it's worth, it's called Timeless. I'm not vouching for it, but I want to make sure people knew about it. Looks like some fun special effects and an interesting cast. So
I want another time travel series because we haven't had many. Heroes kind of had some time travel in it. But before that, it was 7 Days, which I really enjoyed. I was sad when they canceled it. And before that, there was Time Cop, which was what time travel would be if everything was really cheesy and hokey.
Oh, that was a classic movie. I've seen it about 3 or 4 times.
Oh, but they turned it into a series.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we all remember when Spock and Kirk and McCoy went back in time. One of my favorite, and we met Edith Keeler, who had her soup kitchen.
That was City on the Edge of Tomorrow?
Yes.
That episode?
Yeah, and there was that time gate, that weird sort of organically looking thing that.
And it was McCoy who went through, and immediately as he went through, they lost contact with the enterprise because the enterprise no longer existed, so they had to go back and fix the timeline.
Don't you hate when that happens?
I mean, seriously, I can't tell you how many times it's happened.
Yeah, and actually, he mistakenly OD'd on cortisone or something, and so he went out of his mind. He went crazy. He jumped through the portal, and so then Spock and Kirk had to go back and rescue him. And anyway, I'm sure everybody already knows about about that particular episode. It's one of the best.
Oh, and by the way, the chat room just called me out. I just realized one of my favorite shows, Doctor Who, is a time travel series. So, yes, we do have one currently. My bad. Totally my bad. Sorry about that. Ooh.
And, Padre, I meant to ask you this before, whether by any chance you're watching The Strain.
I am not.
It's now in its 3rd season. It's on FX, and I really like it. As they say, there's no accounting for taste. I'm not suggesting that everyone is going to love it, but it holds up. They've built a complete, coherent mythology essentially around the vampire myth, but brought it into the present day with some useful acting, some fun writing, and it's in its 3rd season, and it's really good. So, I just
and with Guillermo del Toro. Okay.
Yes.
No, I'm in. I'm totally into that.
And so the first 2 seasons are available on Hulu, and hint elsewhere. I don't think anybody. Now, again, it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. I get it. But if you don't mind some, a little gore, but something really engaging, it's just, a plane lands at the airport and no one gets out, and they wonder what's going on inside, and the CDC is brought in. I mean, so it's state of the art. And I've noticed in this 3rd season, they recognize they have something good. And so now we're getting, the writers are writing back in some of the older backstory, which is equally good. I'm impressed. So, FX has The Americans that I also really enjoy, and it's going to start its 4th or 5th season. And I only know about The Strain because they were advertising it during the breaks of The Americans. So I just wanted to put it on our listeners' radar.
This might be something that I have to get onto my computer because I'll be taking a trip over to Rome, and I'm actually responsible for some of the entertainment nights. Maybe we can be in the Eternal City watching The Strain. I'm sure that will go over well.
I'd give it a try. I would love to know what you think, because I really enjoy it. I mean, it's well done, and I like things that are well done. And oh my God, that's an awkward segue to start talking about Spinrite. But Anthony Cunningham sent me a long DM, and he said, "Hi, Steve. As I listened to last week's Security Now, Father Robert made a comment that I thought I might be able to help with. Plus, it would work as a Spinrite story. Close to the end of the podcast, he mentioned he wished you could get Spinrite to work on cell phones. And I would like to note that request might be possible already. A previous Spinrite testimonial talked about using it on a virtual machine to do multiple runs at the same time. At the time, that got me to try it. And what do you know? It worked. I also used it on a live Linux USB distro that was at the time not working right, and it fixed that as well. Recently, the cell phone I use at work as my podcast streaming player was getting rather slow and laggy. So I thought, what the heck? I'll try Spinrite on it and see what happens. Using VirtualBox on Linux, I plugged in the phone to the USB, had VirtualBox set it as a raw disk, spun up a VM with Spinrite, and pointed it at the cell phone. Spinrite did its thing, and about an hour later, it was done. I unplugged the phone, rebooted it, and after that, it was running faster and more stable than it had for over a year. I thought to myself, this was great. I'll try it on my Nexus 5 next. But that, unfortunately, was a no-go. The phone must be able to be seen as a mass storage device in order to be used as a raw disk in VirtualBox. And for some reason, the Nexus 5 will only read as a non-mass storage USB device. I hope Father Robert can try this out and see if it helps. So, Anthony, thanks for the great DM and another example of how Spinrite can be leveraged, in this instance, in a VirtualBox in order to run on, on a cell phone and fix it.
That is amazing. I am trying that tonight on my OnePlus One because I know exactly what's going on. Every once in a while, it will just kind of hang, and it's just the garbage collection has not been done properly over the course of the lifetime of this device.
Level 2.
Yep, level 2. All right, that's my task for tonight. Actually, I built a Spinrite only machine a while back for Know How. We never did the episode, but it's sitting there. It's like one of my break-in case of emergency projects. I've got 6 or 7 so that in case I'm just really lazy one week, I can
queued up.
I can bring it. Yeah, but it's I made a tiny little machine that has just a hard drive docking station, and it's got all the different formats, all the way from MSATA
IDE.
to the M.2 to SATA to the large version. And so you just plug in the one you want, turn it on, and then walk away.
Nice.
So I'll try that with this. Who knows? Maybe it will fix my OnePlus.
Cool.
Yeah. Steve,
And that's a podcast.
That is the podcast. And you know what? It is absolutely a pleasure. I'm so sorry to everyone who was hoping to hear the Q&A. We will get to it next week, which is actually tomorrow.
What we promise is 2 hours of engaging content, whether it's sourced from our listeners or from the events of the week. And in this case, now, as our listeners may or may not know, you're traveling, as you just mentioned, to Rome next week. So you and I are recording next week's podcast tomorrow evening, which means there won't be a week's worth of news aggregated. So I think it's very safe to say that next week's podcast, actually recorded like not more than 24 hours from now, will be pretty much all user-sourced content and nothing that the industry has brought to us, because there won't have been any time. As I said, we don't have a time machine, so we'll have to work with what we've got.
Steve, I think that's the only way we're ever going to get to Q&A, because anytime I work with you, I have way too much. Sometimes I know, I'm like, you know what, just let Steve do it. Let Steve do it. And then I just want to get in there. I just want to have so much fun. Thank you for the knowledge you drop on us each and every single week.
Well, this was great, and it's a pleasure working with you, and we'll do it in a little over a day for next week's Security Now.
Indeed.
And if anybody is interested, if the change in schedule allows you to watch it live, we're recording at 7:30 Pacific time, so 10:30 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. That is tomorrow. And so if that allows you to watch it live, it's what is it? Is it still live.twit.tv?
It is indeed.
Cool.
Of course, you know Steve Gibson. He is the mastermind behind GRC.com, the creator of treasures, gems, like Shields Up, Spinrite, and of course, Squirrel. And he's our explainer-in-chief. He is the man that everyone at Twit turns to for the latest and the greatest in security. And, well, we couldn't do it without him. Now, Steve has audio versions and transcripts of the show at his site at grc.com. And you can also find the show wherever fine podcasts are aggregated, including at our show page at twit.tv/SN for Security Now. We do Security Now every Tuesday at 1300 Pacific. Actually, it's 1330. You can watch us live at live.twit.tv or download episodes from twit.tv/SN. You can also subscribe to the show to get it automatically downloaded to your device of choice in your format of choice, as well as downloading directly from the page. We want to give you every chance possible to get your dosage of security goodness. Until next time, I am Father Robert Ballecer, the digital Jesuit, in for Leo Laporte, saying, go be secure.
Thanks, Padre. Talk to you soon.